This is Crypto PTSD, a place for those who have seen the unknown and now must face a new reality. For we know legends are real and they live just outside your door. So join us every Monday night to hear the encounters from the survivors themselves.
It could do worse than kill you. I mean, it just seemed like it could suck your soul out.
Well, initially I said, don't even look back, John, don't even look back.
I could feel the blood rush from my face, thinking these were my last moments. What am I going to do?
And now, your host and creator, Dustin.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Crypto PTSD. We've got an awesome show lined up for tonight. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind everyone that if you haven't joined the Crypto PTSD family yet, hit that subscribe button. I'll send you a notification every week when we upload our new show. And as always, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be a guest on the show, send me an email. My email address is cryptoptsd@gmail.com, and don't forget to put encounter in the subject line. Let's go ahead and get into it tonight. Tonight I'd like to welcome Dwayne onto the show. Dwayne, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on here and be able to share my story with your listeners.
Now, Dwayne, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about where you're from, and you can be as specific or as vague as you want to be.
I'm from northeastern Ohio, a little town called Jefferson, and I grew up just about 10 miles east of here in another little town called Dorset, which is basically just an intersection out in the middle of nowhere. It's all farmland and swamp and forest, and this actually the entire county that I live in, Ashtabula County, is actually designated as swampland.
Dwayne, did you ever hear about Bigfoot or cryptids growing up as a kid in that area?
No. The first time I really heard about it and actually started looking into it was because of, I think, In Search of Leonard Nimoy. I saw some of those in reruns in, I want to say, the late 80s, maybe early 90s. Not again until shows like Finding Bigfoot and that came on.
What did you think about people who had said that they had seen the creature? Did you tend to believe them, or was it just a big joke to you?
Well, actually, I hadn't heard of anybody who had said they'd seen one. I didn't know anybody personally. I grew up on a farm, and like I said, we were pretty isolated. Very small town. Our closest neighbor was, half a mile down the road, and didn't have much interaction with other people, other than, kids in school. But yeah, I'd never heard anything about Bigfoot until later on.
All right, Dwayne. Well, let's go ahead and get started with your encounter tonight. Remember, as you're telling it, try to explain the landscape as best as possible in order to paint a picture in our listeners' minds. I'll let you get all the way through till the end, and then I'll stop you and we'll go back and I'll ask you some detailed questions. But Dwayne, go ahead and take it away tonight.
Okay, thanks. I grew up in Dorset, Ohio. That's where we were living when I had my encounter. And my father worked 10, 15 miles away at the Smith & Wesson plant that was located in Rock Creek, Ohio. And it was situated on Foreman Road, which is a road running north and south. And to the south of the plant, about a mile, is another road running east and west, Tish Road. And if you would proceed west on Tish Road, you would come to the set of railroad tracks that sat about half a mile behind the plant running parallel. Those tracks are no longer there. They were removed, I want to say, probably 15 years ago now, and it was turned into a Western Reserve hiking trail. And it's a paved bike trail now. When we lived in Dorset, we had a huge old farmhouse that was very expensive to heat. And in the winter, my mom and dad would close off the upstairs and they would just heat the downstairs with a wood stove. So we would spend the last few weekends of August and then in September and October cutting wood. And the plant gave my dad permission to cut wood on their property, which they owned all the way behind the plant, running all the way back to those railroad tracks. They owned all that back there because they had, part of it was a testing range where they would go out and test guns and things like that, and, tear gas grenades and stuff. So there was an open area behind the plant where the test range was, and then beyond that it was woods, and they went all the way back to these railroad tracks. And so it was on one of our usual Saturday woodcutting trips. My dad used to drive in, about half a mile or so. So he was behind the plant, directly behind it. And he was cutting wood. It would usually be on the east side of the tracks. And he would chop the trees down, and then he'd cut them up into smaller pieces, and my sister and I would carry them out and load them up into the back of his pickup truck. He had an old International pickup. It was probably 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and, he was cutting logs, and I was carrying them out, and used one of those little plastic disc sleds, and I would tie baler twine to the handles, and I would use that to drag the logs out if they were too heavy for me to carry them. Just on a return trip, I had just finished putting a load in the truck, and I was on my way back to my dad, which I went, about 15 feet or so into the wood line, and then I would have to take a right kind of diagonally to go where my dad was. And I just happened to look up, and if I hadn't looked up, I never would have seen the thing. And it was just 20, 30 feet away, standing behind a tree, and it wasn't a large tree. It was, just a medium size, just peeking out from behind it, watching me. And as soon as I saw it, I just froze. And I had no idea what I was looking at. I didn't feel afraid at that point yet. I was more just startled than anything. But when I noticed it, it was looking at me, but it wasn't looking at me directly. Like its eye line was probably looking at my chest. But then it shifted its, it shifted its gaze and looked up right into my eyes. And then it knew that I saw it. And when it did that, that's what freaked me out. And I screamed like a little girl and took off running for my dad. And when I screamed, that startled it, and it took off in the opposite direction. So I don't even know how long I stood there at first when I froze. It could have been as little as 5 seconds to maybe 10 or 20 seconds. It wasn't very long, but it was long enough for me to get a very good look at the face. And it was, I don't know exactly how tall it was, but it was taller than my dad, and my dad was 6'4". But my dad didn't even hear me holler because he was just so engrossed in what he was doing. And by the time I got to him, I was just kind of in full panic mode, and I was out of breath, and I was just like, Dad, I saw this thing behind a tree, and it was watching me, and he just laughed it off like, oh, you're seeing things, basically told me to shut up and carry the wood, Yeah, he didn't see it, didn't hear anything. So that was basically the extent of the encounter. Didn't last very long, but as far as, the impact that it had on me, it was disturbing, because in listening to some of the other people that have come on here, they all kind of have the same thing in common, where it's a life-changing event, because you're looking at this thing that shouldn't be there. You don't know what it is. Like I said, at the time, I certainly wasn't thinking Bigfoot. I didn't know what it was. It could have been a werewolf or, who knows, a caveman. I didn't know what it was. It really shook me up, and it was so burned in my memory that still, this is 36 years later, I will still occasionally have a dream about it. In fact, yesterday when I was sending you the initial email and going through the entire thing again in my mind and drawing the picture that I sent you, I didn't sleep that well last night. It kind of kept me awake just thinking about it still. And like I said, that was 36 years ago. So, it's definitely, it can be a traumatic experience, especially I think when you're a kid.
Can you tell us what kind of dreams you have? And again, if you're not comfortable with that, we'll move on.
Yeah, sure. Mostly it's just kind of reliving the entire moment, from when I saw it, when I ran off, and then I've had other dreams where it's chasing me or it's coming around the house and banging on the house trying to get in. And those are recurring dreams from when I was a kid that happened shortly after the encounter, because I just kept thinking that, man, these things are, whatever that was, it's out there somewhere. And does it remember me? Is it going to come looking for me? It was like, it just messes with your mind big time.
Before we get into the details of your encounter, there's something that I want to talk about with you, because I do believe you saw this thing, and a lot of people who listen to the shows have never seen one, and so they don't understand there's something that happens whenever you have a real encounter, and it becomes surreal. Like, you actually understand what that word means, surreal.
It does. It absolutely does, because you start questioning everything. It's like, okay, if this thing is real, what else is out there people don't believe in, I mean, at that point, you're willing to believe in leprechauns and unicorns, and it's like, it's like, what else is out there? And it does. It messes with your mind, and it's difficult to talk about. It's easier now, but because I think the general public is a little more open to it than they were, say, 10, 20 years ago. It's like, you wouldn't dare tell anybody, 20 years ago, oh, I saw a Bigfoot. They would just think you were nuts. And the other thing, too, is, people, I noticed with a lot of sightings, one of the first things people say is, well, why didn't you take a picture of it? Or why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? And it's like, you have no idea until you're in that situation. I don't care how prepared somebody thinks they are for that, you're not. When that happens, blows your mind, and you can't even prepare for your reaction, because you just don't know how you're going to react. I mean, I can honestly say that if I had not seen that thing 36 years ago, if I were to have the same encounter tomorrow, I think my reaction would probably be exactly the same, maybe minus the screaming like a little girl, but I still have just been stopped dead in my tracks, not even anywhere having the presence of mind to take a picture, or you're just not thinking that when it happens.
Yeah, Dwayne, you're right, because most people think about it with logic. And so a human being thinking about having an encounter and using logic is just not how it works, because what they're thinking of is, oh, a Bigfoot runs across the road. They're thinking of it without using any factor of emotion. They forget to factor in the emotions that happen during an encounter. And if you're in your truck and you're driving 60 miles an hour and you see something and it's just standing on the road and you got time and you may think of it, sure. But when you're in its environment and it is the master of the situation and it chooses whether you live or die, you do not think about a camera.
Yeah.
Because once the moment in your brain, when you know what you're looking at is not a mask and it is real, no thought of proving it happens, because your mind has grasped what you're staring at is real, and that from that moment on, it's life or death. It's fight or flight, and that's it. And then afterwards, you're like, oh my gosh. And in your encounter, you were locked eyes. Oh, I just got chills saying that. But you were locked eyes with this thing, and so much that you brought up a very unique detail is probably the reason I called you so quick, because I found it very interesting. But before we get into that, let's back up here. Let's get into some of the who, what, when, where, and why, and then we'll get into your drawing and some of those unique facial features I was talking about. Is that okay with you?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay, starting off right off the bat, the place where you're cutting wood, is it on a hill? Is it in the opening? Can you explain the landscape a little bit for me?
It's all flat. And like I said, it's kind of splotchy And the timber is actually a lot less now than it was then. I mean, you were able to walk through it. I mean, there wasn't like a lot of brush, but the trees, it was pretty thick, and the trees were pretty good size.
You're dragging back some brush, and you look up and you see this thing. About how far away is it?
It was only 20, 30 feet. It was close. It was really close.
Okay, so basically, if I had a heavy enough paper wad, I could hit you from the distance that this thing was away from you.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. You said when you first saw it, it was behind a tree, and then it ended up kind of leaning out. So about how wide was the tree?
I want to say the tree probably wasn't any more than a foot in diameter, if that.
Okay, so
But there were other trees, and there were some shrubby kind of stuff growing in there, like ferns and things. It was just turning fall, so I think a few of the leaves were maybe starting to turn, but it was pretty much still green. And I don't think that it was standing, I want to say, facing front. Like, it was more like turned to the side a little bit, so that its profile was, behind the tree. So it was kind of like hiding behind it. Because if it would have just stood behind it facing me, you would have seen its shoulders on either side. And I only saw it from the one side when it leaned out. It did turn a little bit when it leaned, but that was,
Okay. You look up, and this thing is peeking around the tree, and it's hiding behind it, as you would imagine a large man hiding behind a small tree. The only way he would do it, he would stand profile and kind of lean his head forward. As it leaned its head out, was its head leaning out as you saw it, or was it all the way out when you first locked eyes with it?
It was all the way out.
Okay, so
it was like just the head and the shoulder, and then I couldn't even see the bottom part of its right arm because it was obscured by a little bit of brush. The whole body leaned forward, and it didn't, like I said, it wasn't that well hidden, but it's like it didn't need to be. If it didn't move, or like I said, if I hadn't looked right at it, I would have never seen it. I bet you I could have been looking 2 feet in either direction, and I probably wouldn't have noticed it because it just kind of blended in with everything. It just didn't, it was like frozen. And it only moved when I noticed it, and it knew that I saw it. Then it's like it didn't care. It's like, okay, well, he knows I'm here now, so I guess I don't have to be still anymore. At least, that was the impression I got.
Did it square up to you?
It turned a little bit. It didn't totally square up, just a little bit.
What was the length of the hair, and what was the color of the hair?
The hair was a reddish-brown color, and like I said, it kind of blended in with some of the leaves and things like that, and I want to say the hair was not too long around the head and the neck and the shoulders, well, where the head was attached to the shoulders, because it really didn't have a neck, but you could see more of it, its upper body, because the hair was kind of sparse. And that's one of the things that made me think, like, it seemed like it was old to me. But I do remember the hair was longer on its upper arm than it was, and maybe like around the armpit. But other than that, you could see through the hair to the skin. It was either old or it had like a mange or something. It's the only way I could describe it.
Okay, so it's leaning out, and you said the first place it looked was your chest, and then it moved its eyes up to your eyes. What were you wearing that day?
Oh boy, now that I don't remember. Usually I was probably just wearing a pair of jeans, and I used to wear gum boots a lot because it was wet. My mom and dad didn't want our shoes and our pant legs getting all wet and grass stains and that. So I probably had on a pair of jeans and gum boots and probably just a t-shirt or something. Or my mom used to dress me in, those polo shirts a lot back then. Had all kinds of those old polo shirts. You wouldn't think wearing a polo shirt out to cut wood, but you have to understand, 90% of our clothes came from garage sales, and, so it wasn't like I was wearing anything fancy out there. It was just, whatever I had on.
Okay, and I could be wrong on this, but I'm going to speculate on this for a minute, and then we'll get right back to the details. I think that detail is very important. And again, I could be wrong on this, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe that this is what this creature was doing. I know as a child, I was the master of hide and go seek. I wanted to grow up and be a sniper, so I was always hiding in the thickest bush or hiding in obvious places that I knew you wouldn't look and all sorts of stuff. And one thing that I used to do is whenever somebody would walk up close to me, I would never look at their eyes. I would always look at their feet or their stomach. And I don't know why I did that. But later in life as an adult, I heard a speech one time about chi. We all wonder, those karate fighters or the ones that use chi and all that. Is it real? Is it not? Who knows? But one thing I do know is, especially like with hunting, I don't stare at the animal's eyes. And I don't know if that's a predatory thing. I don't know what it is, but I always thought as a kid, that was one of my secrets that made me better at hide and go seek than anyone else. I was always the person that everyone would be like, okay, game over. We found everybody, come out. And I'd be the one left where they couldn't find me. And so I'm almost wondering is if these things, because they're master hiders, he's hiding and he's looking at your chest instead of your eyes, because if you look into someone's eyes, once they look up and they notice you're there, the first thing they do is they lock eyes with you. So the reason I asked what you were wearing is because I was curious as to maybe if you had a bright colored logo on, or if maybe this thing was intentionally not looking at your eyes, hoping not to make that connection. And I know there's gonna be people out there that are like, oh, Dustin's lost his marbles. But I seriously think there's something to it. And in that speech I heard, apparently they train special forces guys to do the same thing, to not look in someone's eyes if you're trying to hide, because for some reason, if you stare at someone long enough, I guess with the wrong intent, they can feel you looking at them. And I think we've all have experienced this at one point or another in our lives. But I wonder, is that what this thing was doing? What do you think about that?
I agree with that. I think that animals, too, for some reason, I think if you're looking at an animal in the eyes, I think they can somehow, it's like a sixth sense or something where they can actually sense that. And that's when they know that they're being watched.
Yeah, and that's a very unique detail that I thought, this thing was looking at your chest, and so much so that you noticed it, and then once it knew you saw it, it worked his eyes up and looked straight at you. So okay.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say I probably had on something that was blue or had blue in it, like a dark navy blue, because that's my favorite color, and like almost all my shirts now and even then were navy blue with some kind of, pattern or stripes. It might have been like blue and white stripes or something like that.
It absolutely could have just been looking at your chest for whatever reason, but I find that's a curious detail. So let's go ahead and move back into it here. So you said the hair was reddish brown. Let's talk about the skin color on the body first, and then let's talk about the skin color on the head, and tell everyone what you told me in that email.
Well, the skin was mostly light colored, and it was almost close to like a Caucasian flesh, but it was spotted. And I couldn't tell you if it was light colored skin with dark spots, and the spots were gray, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that, but the spots were gray. But I couldn't tell you if it was light-colored skin with gray spots or if it was gray skin with, like, white spots, because it kind of looked like that, skin disease that people get, that vitiligo. And it kind of looked like that. So, or it could have been, like, age spots, because for some reason, the overall impression I got of the entire thing was that it was old. It seemed like it was, very wrinkly in the face. And it never seemed aggressive. I was scared just because of what it was, but it never, made any threatening moves towards me. It never growled or made any noises. Didn't show its teeth. In fact, I didn't see any teeth at all, which I couldn't even tell you if it had teeth. but it just seemed old to me. Like it was actually balding on top. The hair was really sparse on the face. And you could even see the ears, because the ears were small compared to like a human's ears. They were small and almost, they weren't long. I want to say they were almost like completely round in shape. Just on the side of its head, like back behind its cheekbones, kind of high up, almost level with the eyes.
I was just gonna say, everyone will be looking at the photo right now, and I'm looking at it, and two of the things that jumped out to me were the ears. So when I saw him, I'm like, okay, he saw the ears, and the eyes. And the eyes are just, from the eye shine that I've seen that I believe were Bigfoot, that is what I picture. That is almost exactly, except, when you have light shining off the back part of the eye, it doesn't give the exact shape. It kind of shines past the line, so it becomes more rounded. But that is about exactly, every time I've seen it in real life, in person, that's what I always picture their eyes must look like. So the two things that jumped out.
Eyes were very dark. The eyes were very dark. It almost seemed like, what would normally be the iris on a person. It's like the whole thing was like pupil. They were so dark, like really dark brown to almost black. And then it was like the white part of the eye, what would normally be the whites, that part was brown.
Okay, so in your drawing here, what we see as the white part of the eye, it was actually brown?
Yeah, it wasn't real brown, but it was dark. You ever see people that have, kind of yellow eyes? They're not real white.
Yeah, like jaundice, yeah.
Yeah, kind of like that, but more kind of like I want to say maybe like an amber color.
Did its facial expression change at any time?
No, never. When it locked eyes with me, that was like it acknowledging that I saw it, but it never changed expression. It's almost like it was just kind of dumbfounded too. I don't know any other way to put it. It just didn't register any emotion at all, none, until I screamed, and then even then it didn't really do anything except just take off.
Did you see it turn and run?
Just for a split second, because we were both going at the same time. As soon as I let out that yell, I spooked it and it was gone.
How did it turn to run?
I'm not really sure. I know it just turned a little bit to its right, because it still wasn't turned completely facing me square. He was already kind of that way anyway, kind of almost at a 45-degree angle, and then he just turned around the rest of the way and was gone. And I didn't hang around to see where he went.
Did you ever see the hands or the fingers?
No. Nope. No, there was some kind of something growing. It could have been berry bushes or something, because there's a lot of wild berries and thorns and all kind of stuff that grows in Ohio. So like I said, I couldn't really see anything past, I want to say, probably his elbow.
Whenever you first saw him, about how high was its face off the ground?
If I had to guess, I would say it had to be at least 7 feet, because my dad is 6'4", and I know it was taller than my dad. I mean, it was up. And it's flat ground, like I said, so unless he was standing on something, which I don't know if he was or not. I mean, I don't think he was, but just the size of the head, too, I would say he was probably around 7 foot, because the head was pretty big. I mean, it was thick,
Yeah. If
he was a senior citizen, I can tell you what, he ran pretty spry for an old Bigfoot.
If you had to take a normal everyday object, so let's say a golf ball, a tennis ball, a softball, and a melon, and it was going to stick one of those objects in its mouth comfortably and chew down on it, which one do you think it could fit in its mouth?
Not a melon for sure, but probably a softball.
Oh, that's insane. How much do you think this creature weighed?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't see enough of it. I mean, it had to be heavy, though. I mean, because it was so big. I mean, I know I'm a big guy. I mean, I'm 6'4" and weigh 320. And it was bigger than me, so I would say maybe 500 pounds, maybe more.
After this encounter, and you go and tell your dad, what was the rest of how much longer did you guys stay out there?
We were out there for a while. He got kind of mad at me because he just didn't want to hear it. My dad has absolutely no interest in anything supernatural, paranormal. He just does not care. And just didn't want to hear it. He was there. We had a job to do, and we lived on a farm, so it was work. We had a job to do, and he wanted to just get the wood cut and get done, and get out of there. But I would say we were there probably another good 45 minutes, maybe an hour and a half even. And I was definitely nervous the rest of the time, and I was looking around, every step of the way, back and forth, and I didn't see anything.
All right, tell us, what was your take on the whole thing? Why do you think the creature was there? What do you think it was planning to do? What do you think?
At the time, I had no idea. But now, having, listened to other people's encounters and having watched, a lot of these documentaries and things, the only thing I can think of is that it heard the noise we were making, specifically my dad chopping wood, which, he would split the logs right there because that way we could carry them. Otherwise, me and my sister, they were too big for us to carry out. So he would split the logs with the axe right there. And that wood chopping sound, is very similar to wood knocking. And that's the only thing that I could think of, is that it heard my dad chopping wood and was curious and just came to see what was going on. That's all I got.
A lot of people would probably think, well, why would an animal come so close if they're doing all that racket? I can personally vouch for putting up a deer stand and having a truck running down in a holler. One came right up on us within 20 yards. And I personally think that they use the cover of the sound you're making, and that gives them a false sense of security and confidence. And so they sneak in extra close because they know you're not going to hear them with everything that's going on.
Yeah, they can use the noise you're making to cover their own movement. And not only that, but I mean, you saw the drawing I did, and it was so close to human, but just not, And so people are curious. And, and this is not a remote area that we're talking about here. There was a factory within a half a mile that used to test guns. And there were people living all over the place. And yet, there it was.
This plays right along with my beliefs and theories on these things hide in plain sight, and you don't have to go in the middle of nowhere to find them. The documentary that was done about me, I took them to a shooting range and showed them all this stuff. Now, not all of it made in the documentary, but footprint structures, and that was the last place I ever thought I would have to worry about Bigfoot being there watching. But I think that they have this constant distrust with humans, and so anything that could be perceived as a threat, they have to keep tabs on. And I agree with you. I think that's what it was doing. I think it was coming in. Now, maybe it was going to grab one of the kids. I don't know. That's really pushing it, because I think it could have if it wanted to. But it just seems like it came in, used the sound you guys were making against you, moved in extra close, wasn't expecting you to see it, and when you did, it was like, oh crap. Oh well, like he sees me now, and what am I gonna do? And then when you screamed, he's like, yeah, I better get out here before Dad comes over here. But that's just it. Yeah. It's so fascinating, and You know, the people that go out and do the wood knocking or whatever, that may work, but I think one of the best ways is just go and do human stuff, and they're going to come in and check you out.
I tell you, I really believe, I mean, if you listen to every encounter that I've ever heard where people actually saw one, it's an accident. I mean, I very seldom have I ever heard of somebody who goes out with the intent to find a Bigfoot or see a Bigfoot and they see one. Yeah. It's always an accident.
I agree with
you.
You
just got to be in the right place at the right time, and it just happens.
Unless you're tracking them, then yes, I agree with you 100%. I know, like Nathan Rio, he tracks them and he's had a lot of encounters, but he's probably the only person that I know of, because all the others, they don't track, they don't beat through the bush, they just stay on human trails and do human things and try to communicate through knocks and yells, and rarely do they get anything. But when you just go out, and most of the encounters, they're completely by accident. And those encounters, usually people are doing something in a new area, or the Bigfoot just wasn't expecting you to be looking over there. And boom. I mean, yours, you even said yourself, if you didn't look up at that exact second, you would have never seen it. And it was standing right there.
Even if I had looked, a couple feet on either side of him, I wouldn't have seen him. As long as he stayed still, I would have never noticed him.
What was the first thing you noticed?
It was the face, because I just accidentally looked right at it. It was just like, when you're looking at one of those magic eye pictures, and there's nothing there, and all of a sudden you see it. It was like that.
Yeah.
I had to do a double take. And even though I looked right in the face, and for that split second, I still wasn't even sure if I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing, until he looked up at my eyes. And when the eyes moved, that's when I realized, yes, that thing is standing there. And that's when I got scared.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's crazy. All right, well, we're coming up to where we're going to have to wrap it up here. So why don't you tell us, I know you and your wife has recently went back and got some photos of some tree breaks in that exact area. Tell us about that trip real quick.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier, those railroad tracks are gone now, and now it's actually a paved biking and hiking trail. Mostly biking, I think, because we actually encountered a couple people on bikes when we were there. But we walked in, drove right past the plant, which is abandoned, but it's still there, and went up Tish Road, which is still there, and parked alongside the road, and we walked back in about 30 minutes along the paved trail till we were behind the plant again. And as I said, it's newer growth now. The trees aren't nearly as big, but we just started looking around, and there were no trespassing signs, where we were at, so we probably shouldn't have been there. But my curiosity got the better of me, because this particular tree that was broken, you could see it from the path. That's why we went in specifically to that tree. I was like, well, look at that over there, And yeah, we came upon this one tree in a group of trees, and you saw how big it is. I mean, it was a good, 4 inches maybe in diameter, and it was completely snapped off and twisted about 90 degrees counterclockwise around. And I looked at it, and there was not a saw mark on it. There wasn't a hatchet mark on it. I thought, what in the world could have done this? Because I was like, there's just no way, man. It would take hand. I mean, even if the wind blew it over, it wouldn't twist it around. It just didn't make any sense. And after we found that, we both got a little creeped out and said, okay, well, it's time to go. So we got the heck out of there, and we walked out there a little bit faster than we walked in. But that was it.
All right, so I got to ask you this one on the way out here. Has this encounter changed you? And if it has, how?
Yeah, it certainly opened my mind to the possibility of things that we don't understand, and the possibility of other things, UFOs, aliens, ghosts. I mean, who knows what's out there that we just, just on the edges of what we assume is reality, because when you have that experience, this thing should not exist, but it does. That's basically all you can take away from it. I mean, once you've seen something that your brain is telling you can't be, but it is, it just opens up the door to all these other things.
All right, Dwayne, I'd really like to thank you for coming on the show, man. And I got to say, this drawing is, I think I can safely say, it's the best eyewitness sketch I've seen yet. And I know you're an artist, and so that plays into it, but this is just amazing. So I'd like to thank you for allowing me to use this photo to show everyone.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It does help that I'm an artist, and I've been an artist ever since I was in school, even as far back as that time. And I do portraits, and so I really pay attention to facial detail. That's like my thing. So that helps a lot in me being able to describe this creature. So thank you very much for having me, Dustin. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone, that's going to be it for tonight's show. But before we go, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't joined the Crypto PTSD family yet, hit that subscribe button. I'll send you a notification every week when we upload our new show. And as always, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be a guest on the show, send me an email. My email address is cryptoptsd@gmail.com. And make sure you put encounter in the subject line. If you're listening to us on iTunes, take that extra minute to rate and review. It really helps out the show. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you next week.